Hi, I'm Angelique, and today we are tasked with using mixed berry and deep forest green to make a very visual, pleasing, stunning project. And these two colors I'm really excited about. Now, just a reminder, Quilting with Color is a challenge where I'm challenging myself and you to get out of your comfort zone and try some different colors. So as you saw, we randomly drew these two and had to come up with something. Before we get started, I want you to like and subscribe and ring that bell so you get notifications on all our great quilting content right here on our Grace channel. So let's start talking a little bit about color theory so we can figure out how I decided to use these two great colors. When I saw these two colors come out of the drawing, I already knew right off the bat that these two colors are what we call complementary colors. So you can see that here on my graphic. Here is my mixed berry, and right across from that is the greens. And so we have our deep forest green, some lighter greens, some of these colors here. You can see this looks really, really close to our deep forest. That meant I didn't have to worry about how am I going to make these two colors work. So now I decided to focus on something that we've only talked a little bit about, and that's things like tone and shade and so on. So I did get out my little handy dandy color wheel here and found that this really kind of falls into the red violet category. So I really wanted to focus on these differences of like shade and tone and tint. So starting with like tint, that's adding white to the color, so that's making it go lighter. Shade is making it go darker by adding black, and if I add both black and white, I get gray, and that's where I get some differences in tone. So to kind of take a little bit closer look at some of the shades that we can use, we start to get into these like deeper colors, some burgundy, some boysenberry, you know, almost grapey colors, but not too blue on that scale, all the way to things like bubblegum and rose. So I had to sit down, I had to decide what it was that I was going to design. And I decided tulips. Because, you know, February, March time frame, it's still winter, but it's spring. And I started to remember when I lived in Germany, how I traveled to Holland to go to the Tulip Festival. And then I remembered here in Utah, we have a Tulip Festival too. And it starts around these time periods and will run through May. So they're the colder flowers that are gonna start coming up. And I'm like, I love tulips. So that was my inspiration behind this project. And I just kind of threw some colors in here. You can already kind of see the pop here that I had envisioned, even though it didn't fill right into my scheme of just looking at those shades and tones and stuff of the hue. And then I wanted something to kind of frame it, but not take too much away, so I went with one of those lighter colors, like kind of that bubblegum or princess pink thing that was going on. So now I have my idea. It's time to start looking at fabric. I started with the hearts because our hearts are made up of a dark and light stripe. I grabbed some of the finesse thread colors we have that were close to the colors that I wanted for this project to help me find the fabric. Now this is Merlot. It's a little redder than I wanted, but it was a close choice to kind of help me find the depth that I was looking for, but something that definitely fit more into the mixed berry. And then for the alternating stripes, with the lighter stripes, I wanted something that was a little kind of between this magenta and our princess pink. So something a little bit more bubbly gum. And so those were really easy choices for me. And of course, I loved the patterns that were in here. That was really just going to elevate the look of the quilt. And then when I started thinking about the tulip, now this was a harder one for me because my eye just kept getting drawn to this batik. It just has a lot of those colors in it that we were looking at in the color wheel, but then it also had some of that orange, which opened me up to adding a little bit of the analogous color. So if you look at our color wheel that we have up on the screen, you'll see kind of these peachy oranges starting to pop out. And because this had everything that I wanted, and then it added that, it allowed me to add a little bit more of this for that center part of the tulips. So I was like, this is perfect. I love it. I mean, you can see how well this is blending in. Definitely still on theme here. And then for the pink, I could not find just a solid pink. And again, this was another one of those things that it caught my eye. And I was like, I love it so much. It has the color I'm looking for with that little bit darker but lighter pinks. And I loved it had that little pop of green and that really bright. I love those bright colors. We have that as well. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna make this one work. I was a little worried at first that maybe it was gonna be a little too busy, but I paired it with a nice white that's got some patterns in it as well. So that white on white, those low volumes, tiny little flowers on that. So it was all coming together. The green, super easy. All I did was find a light and a dark that basically was in my threads here. So I could just have some alternating colors to kind of blend those two in and have some places where you have your eye to kind of rest on those darker shades when we start looking at the leaves. So that kind of inspired me. Now we can get to doing some of the assembly of this quilt. When it comes to the colors, these are the colors I'm primarily going to focus on: the deep forest green and the mixed berry. For the backing, as well as some of the lighter areas of the quilt, I'm probably going to play with pink rose and some of those areas where I want a little bit more color, the princess pink. So these are my choices for today. All right, so I'm going to show you how to make a couple of the blocks that are a little bit different in the way that I'm making them. We do have some basic 4 patches in just 2 different arrangements. Super easy to put together, so I'm not going to show you that. But I'm going to show you how to make the tulip, the heart, and the leaves that we're using for our project. And so here we have some different size squares that you're going to need to cut out. That information is available in the free pattern, which you can find in the description of this video. So check that out, follow along with me. You're going to cut some squares, cut them diagonally to make some triangles. You got a couple rectangles and the square of that peachy orange for that centerpiece of our tulip. And so we're going to sew this in a very specific way so that when we do some of our cutting, we can get to our 9.5-inch block for that final assembly. So we're going to start by sewing this piece here to this square here. So it's going to end up sewing this here. So we'll end up with this piece, which will then sew to this. So we're going to go 1, 2. Once we do that, we're going to sew this one to this edge here. And now we're ready to sew on this last part, which will end up basically covering all of this. We're going to do a little trimming in between, put our last 2 sides on, do some final trimming, and get to the 9.5. I will be piecing on the Little Rebel, and I'm using Snow White to do all my piecing. So let's head over there and we'll start piecing this together. So we're going to sew that seam allowance, being careful not to stretch my fabric because we do have a bias due to the cut of the diagonal. So now we're going to do a trim before we finish up so that we're able to line up our last parts better. We're using our 9.5-inch ruler as well as the 3x18 for some of those little bit longer cuts. From True Cut, love our mats. I like the really big ones, so I have plenty of space to work on. My absolute go-to, the My Comfort cutter for all the cuts that I'm doing, nice and ergonomically comfortable. And you'll notice there's a diagonal line right here. I'm going to use this as a guide that I'm going to line, I'm going to line up right here. So it's along that edge. And then half of 9.5 is 4 3/4. So I'm going to slide this down so that my point is at 4 3/4 and 4 3/4. I should have about 1/4 inch at the top here. Now I'm going to cut off my edges. Oh, we're going to try to do it backwards. Can she do it? Oh, look at that. All right, I can't do that for the bottom though. I'll get this line back up just so I get that good perfect cut. And now I'm ready to put on my sides. Now we're just going to do our final cut. All I got to do is line up to my other edges, and I'm just going to trim off this excess of these bottom triangles. And how cute and pretty is this? I love it. You're gonna need to make 3 of those. Now let's look at our other flower head, the heart. First, you're going to just cut some strips of fabric, width of fabric long, sew them together as I have here with the darker color in the middle. And then we're going to need a 8.5 inch piece and a 3 3/4 inch piece. Again, you're gonna have some squares that you have to cut in certain sizes, which again, you're gonna cut diagonally, and you are going to line up, very similar to what we did before with the tulip. We just have a little bit different shape here. Only this time we're going to sew this one to this one first, so that will flip over. Then we're going to sew this completed one to this one. Once we do that, we're going to do a little bit of trimming to get the top part to the size that we need it. Then we're going to add our 2 top corners here. Then we'll do our bottom corners, overlapping that 1/4 inch at the bottom, like you kind of see here, but we have to do one at a time because we are going to have that overlap. Then some final cutting, and we will complete 2 of these. Now it's time to trim to our final size. I'm going to want 1/4 inches at the top and the bottom, so I kind of like to line that up first. And again, I am looking for a line here at that 4 3/4 mark so that I get nice even cuts here and my heart stays in the center. How cute! For the leaves and stems, I decided to do paper piecing. Now, paper piecing isn't my favorite, but I'm trying to get better at it because I have a quilt that I want to do that's all paper piecing. And right now, all the paper piecing that I have done has just been a few blocks here and there in a quilt. For this pattern, you're going to have 2 different types of leaves and stems. And to get started, you're going to want to fold all of your lines first, which you see I have done that. This time, I'm using a method that's new to me, and it's the non-sew on the paper method. This is the first time I used it, and you know what? I love it. It is my new favorite method. So they are numbered, and I've just kind of pre-cut some fabric for myself. And we're going to start with A, and I want to make sure, because this is my low volume white, what side is my right side. And this is my right side. So I'm going to place this down, and then on the paper, I'm going to add some glue. Now, I kind of learned this the hard way. Get the kind that is not purple if you're using a light color, because if you put it directly on there on paper, it disappears. On fabric, it can actually get darker. It will wash out, so that's not an issue. I just didn't plan on washing this quilt anytime soon. So I'm just pushing that glue on there so that it stays in place. So then what I'm going to do, I just need to turn this around, is I'm going to fold at that first line, and I'm going to take my ruler, and so this was a little bit different. Now, normally you're going to cut exactly 1/4 inch, but since I'm not sewing directly on the paper, I'm sewing next to the paper. I moved my line next to the paper, okay? That's where my stitch line is going to be anyway. So from there, I then cut off my seam allowance. I'm going to go ahead and leave that folded. Now I'm going to take my strip of my green, and I'm lining that up on that edge. And you can pin or clip, it's kind of up to you. But notice it's still right sides together, right? So the right side against this right side here. All right, so let's go sew this one, and then I'll show you the next steps. I want you to notice what I'm using here is my 1/4 inch foot, and on the other side here where the 1/8 is, I'm lining up the edge of that with my paper, and I'm going to go slow. So I'm just lining that up nice and close, taking my time to keep it lined up. Now I'm just going to tidy up my seam allowance since that other piece is sticking out a little bit. So again, just going to line it up like I did before, cut off that little sliver. And I'm going to lay my paper back unfolded, fold over, and with a dry iron, not that a wet iron would hurt except for your paper is going to get, wet, which is why I'm using a dry iron, I'm going to press that seam down. Now I'm going to take my glue again and I'm going to add glue to where that second fabric's going to be. That's going to help hold it in place. This is actually really important in comparison because I'm not going to have stitching that's holding my paper on. The glue is what's holding my paper on. Now I'm ready for the next line. Let me give you one more tip. And then pretty much the process is the same, so I'll get that finished up and then I'll show you the very, very last part of it. Now, one place that I struggle is getting my pieces large enough to cover the area. So don't be skimpy. There's ways to kind of lay it out, and with these straighter pieces, it seems a lot easier for me. It's when I have these angles where I end up like leaving off a little bit of a corner. And when I go to do my final assembly, then I have this rough edge that can show up if it's not close enough to my seam allowance, right? So definitely make your pieces large enough. If it looks like it's barely gonna fit, chances are good it's really not gonna fit. So just don't skimp on that, and then with practice you'll get a little bit better. So I'm gonna sew this on, continue those steps, and then we'll go right back to the very end. So we'll be right back. All right, once finished, we're just gonna trim off our excess, and it's gonna be our 9.5-inch squares. We'll just use our template to do that. So there is our finished piece. Now wait for it. This is the best part. And now I can use it again. I just love that because there are different papers that you can use when you're paper piecing, but we print a lot on paper, on just printer paper here, and so this just makes it so much easier for me to do, and I just get this perfect little block. So you're gonna need to make 2 of these and 3 of this one. Okay, I have all my blocks done. Let's take a minute to go ahead and lay it out on the design wall. After laying it out, I decided the best way to tackle this was to go ahead and sew my flowers together first. And that's so I could really get this centered as best as possible with the different leaves that I had, especially with this heart being so pointed like this. I really wanted to try to get this lined up. And because I did that, I also had to do the same thing with my other pieces for my background pieces. So then from there, it basically takes our 6 rows and turns them into 3 rows, and then we will sew those 3 rows together. Here it goes. I love it. I just love how happy it makes me feel, and a lot of that are the color choices. So let's go quilt this. So I'm gonna do a little bit of mix of automation and some free motion ruler work. We are starting with the automation. Now I started by being in Pattern CAD so that I could take a look at some of the patterns that we have, and I decided to use this tulip edge to edge that you see here. Because my tulips that I made on the quilt are pointing up, I wanted to rotate this so that it is facing upwards. And then just kind of looking at the size of this, even though it's an edge to edge pattern, it's not going to work as an edge to edge the way that I want to do it. So I also decided that I wanted to go ahead and copy this and then move it over and flip it so that I could get them facing inwards. And then I also decided I want a few facing outwards as well. So that gave me kind of the idea for my design that I was going to use these double tulips. And then I also decided to use Quilt CAD so that I could audition the design. And so this is what I came up with. Now that I am in Quilt CAD, I can actually quilt this as a row or as an entire piece. I'm going to do this first part, so I'm going to highlight it, and I'm going to place this as a single pattern. And now I'm ready to set my notes. This is something that I have to constantly remind myself to do, to the point where I'm about to put a sticky note, but I am always go to optimize. So I'm going to hit the quilt button. I'm going to go to optimize, and I'm going to take a look at like the order, and are there ones that I care about where I want it to stop, because you can see I have some trim lines here, and I want to make this a little bit easier on myself. And since I've created these like pairs, I'm okay if these stitch together here. I think that's just going to kind of add to almost like if they're like a vase or something that they're in. But I'm going to leave the other 2 trim lines because I definitely don't want them to connect there. So now we're ready to quilt. Still still need to do the binding, but let's take a look at the finished quilted quilt. I just love how this quilt turned out. And I'd love to hear in the comments how you think I did with the colors in this quilt. And if you'd like to make your own Hearts and Tulips quilt, you'll find the free pattern in the description of this video. Overall, it's a pretty easy pattern, but it will build your skills in foundation paper piecing and curve pieces. Until next time, bye.